I have read 13 books so far this year, so let's talk about them. In January I read 3 books, and if you want to see my in-depth thoughts about all of them, you can check out this vlog here, because they were all books that came out this January. The first one I finished this year was The City of Stardust by Georgia Summers. It is an urban fantasy and therefore very much outside of my comfort zone, and very much a bad decision to start the year with. I did not enjoy this book at all. I really shouldn't even have finished it. DNFing is something that I am working on this year. The City of Stardust is about a girl from this family where they are cursed. Someone from the family every generation is taken by this very powerful woman from a different world. But our young protagonist knows nothing about this. She's not let into the secret by her family, who instead try to hide her away. The male lead is a young boy who is taken in by this powerful woman to learn the magic, or I'm not really sure how the magic system worked, but to learn how to use some sort of some sort of world traveling kind of magic. And our main character having a year to try and work out what's going on, what happened, where her mum disappeared to, in order to try and save herself. The writing was very, very cheesy and I really didn't enjoy it. I don't think the world was built particularly well. As I said, I don't understand the magic system at all, and not in a like vague, whole world is kind of more vibes than well built kind of way, more in a these ideas were very loosely laid out on the page kind of way. The characters themselves would be described in one way, like our main character was described as like very clever, very good at finding out secrets, very wise and wily, and then you actually read the book and she's a complete idiot who does things without thinking all of the time and never thinks anyone will recognise her, even though she's become the most famous person. It lacked any sense of plight or peril. It's supposed to be like terrible things might happen, and there were moments of violence which all happened off the page, so you just read about the aftermath of them, and our main characters were never really in any sort of danger, so you never really worried about them. It never felt like anything was properly at stake, and so overall it just felt like a really empty book and I really didn't enjoy reading it. The next one was Rabbit Hole by Kate Brodie, which I picked up thinking it was a thriller. I was trying to get outside of my comfort zone this year and read more page-turning, like fun books, fun, silly, rompy things, which I haven't really managed, and I didn't with this either, because it was much more a like woman slowly unravelling, a woman making bad decisions, slow-moving, character-focused literary fiction than it was a thriller, and it wasn't one that particularly worked for me either. It is about a woman whose younger sister went missing years ago, and at the beginning of the book her father commits suicide. He never got over the loss of his daughter. Over the course of the book we realise that he has been hunting for her for the past years and been involved in kind of online true crime communities who are fixated on this story. We also uncover the messy family dynamic, estranged family members, and like lots of suspects, and because after her father's death our main character kind of gets more drawn into this true crime world. I don't think it really used the true crime in the way that I thought it might. I thought it was going to look at the ideas of who becomes obsessed with it and who is a victim in this situation, but it more seemed to use that as a framing device, like true crime is popular, so I'm going to bring true crime into my novel in order to get people to read it, rather than properly engaging with the issues of true crime. I also have read a lot of these women making bad decisions and being like unhinged. I think they're very popular books at the moment, and a lot of them don't work. I think because they're so popular we end up reading a lot like each other. This book in the end I would say mostly just dragged. It lacked good pacing and it lacked an interesting plot. It just seemed to be going round and round in circles. In terms of the style of writing it was fine, and if you are into those books I think this would be a good one for you. Like it would definitely fill the vibe, but I think it was a little surface level and a little lacking. The final one I read in that vlog was the one that I liked the most, and it's Glorious Exploits by Fedea Lennon. This one is set in Syracuse during like ancient Greek times, after the war between Athens and Syracuse, and there are a group of Athenians who are stuck in the quarry. They're being kept held as prisoners of war in the quarry, and our main characters go and visit them a lot because they will recite poetry for them, recite the ancient Greek tragedies, and they get an idea that they want to put on a performance of Euripides in the quarry. And there is a lot of hatred towards these Athenian men in Syracuse because a lot of Syracusans were lost during the war. A lot of people lost fathers and brothers and things. And whilst it is a fairly simple premise, it is looking at war and violence and kind of masculinity and its relation to those things in the ancient world, and like art as a way to connect between conflicted people, and kind of the aftermath of war and the aftermath of conflict and people's relationships with between people who have been in conflict. And also it is written in a really interesting way. Fedor Lenin is a poet, and there is very poetic, beautiful language used, but also it is written in Hiberno English, so it is written in like the way Irish people speak English, with a lot of like Irish slang, because Fedor Lenin is an Irish writer and he is using that vernacular in the way that he makes his characters speak, which felt like a really interesting comment on the way we think of classics and the ancient world, and the use of sort of standard English, Victorian or Romantic poet English as the standard way we view the ancient world. And none of these people were speaking English in the first place, so it was playing with the way that you can write a story like that. It wasn't a perfect book. It got a little melodramatic, and I thought that the ramping up of the plot towards the end became a lot more about going on this kind of harebrained adventure and a lot of like tragedy and violence, but I did enjoy the way that it was written and some of the ideas that it was exploring. And in February I read 4 books, and they all came out in February as well, so you can again watch the vlog where I read those books if you want more in-depth thoughts from me. The first one that I finished was Further by Toby Lloyd. This is an interesting book. I quite enjoyed. It is kind of a family drama thriller, and I thought that it was pretty well written. It is about a like well-to-do Jewish family in North London, and when she is about 13 years old, the daughter from this family goes missing for a few days, and then she turns up, and when she comes back she is changed from who she was before. And the mother of this family at the beginning of the book is interviewing the grandfather, the father's father, who is on his deathbed, but she's interviewing him about his experience of the Holocaust, and writes a book about him. Then we flash forward in time, and the youngest son has gone to university. He's gone to Oxford, and he is interacting with people, and he seems like very strange, very distant from people, but an outside character who is ethnically Jewish but was raised without completely outside of the religion and culture, becomes kind of intrigued by and obsessed with this youngest son, and also with the family. And so our main the mother of this family is kind of very all-powerful, kind of controlling, using her family for clout, writing about them in newspapers and kind of using them. But the family are also this tight-knit group that are obsessed with one another, and whilst they cannot seem to be in the same room together, they also band together against people outside of the family. There is commentary on like Zionism and right-wing Judaism in this book, and also on rising anti-Semitism and the ways that Jewish families like this feel constantly under attack. And I think it is a very nuanced portrayal of that. There is moments of really high tension and a lot of interesting character work as well. So I did enjoy reading this one. Then I finished Mongol by Hanako Footman, which I really enjoyed reading. This is the story of 3 Japanese and Japanese-British women. We have our one character who is coming from Japan when she's 18 years old to England to go to a music school, who becomes involved in a relationship with her older music teacher. Then we have a few years later a young teenage girl who is half Japanese, half English, but her mother died when she was very young, and she is kind of coming of age, exploring her queer identity and also her identity as a Japanese person when she has been so disconnected from her culture because she's been raised by her white father and her step family. And then we also have another young Japanese woman who lived in the countryside in Japan with her grandparents and her mother, who was very depressed, and ends up going to Tokyo and working as a sex worker in Tokyo. And it explores how these 3 women's lives reverberate against one another and interact with one another, and is a very poetic and beautifully moving kind of coming of age story for all three of these women that explores identity and womanhood and sexual violence and kind of exoticization, fetishism of Japanese women and expectations of Japanese femininity, and also sort of coming of age, queer identity, music. It's very, very beautifully written, and I really enjoyed reading it. I thought it was so moving. I think it made me cry. You can watch the vlog to check out if I was right, and it did make me cry. Yeah, I really enjoyed the words of this. I thought that it was so beautiful and poignant. It's not a hugely plotty novel, but it is very well explores emotion and very complicated situations, which I thought was done very well. Another sad queer coming-of-age novel is Blessings by Chukwuebuka Ibe, and this one is set in Nigeria in like the 2000s and 10s, about a young boy who is discovered by his father in a kind of queer moment with an older boy, and his father then sends him to this seminary school which is very strict and abusive to him, and his coming of age there, his relationships with other boys in the school, both friendships and romantic relationships, and his moving on after that as well, out into the world as a young Nigerian man at university, around the time in 2015 when being gay was again outlawed in Nigeria. And it also has moments from the perspective of his mother and her relationship with her son, who was always different and always harshly judged and watched by the community in which he is living. It is a simple coming of age story. It doesn't have a lot of, it goes in exactly the direction that you would expect. It doesn't have any like twists or turns or difference to the structure, but it is done really well. The writing itself is lovely. The character work, I think, is the best thing about this book. Our main character, but also the other characters he interacts with, are all very well fleshed out, and again it looks at the nuances of these situations, of the violence and the abuse, of the situation of this school, and of living in the fear of living in a country where who you are has become outlawed, and the violence used against you in order to like prop up a failing government. It was a really interesting look at that time period in Nigerian society and culture as well, and I think it was good. It was very, as I said, very simple, but I think it was a good example of that genre. I would say I would like to read some books from from African countries, from various different African countries that have more joy. I think that a lot of the books from African countries that get published in the UK seem to deal a lot with darkness, and that's not the fault of this book, but I think I would like to read something more fun. And then the final book that I read in that vlog was The Fetishist by Catherine Min, which is, again, it was actually quite similar to Blessings, except not Blessings, it was actually quite similar to Mongrel in terms of some of the themes that it is dealing with, fetishization of East Asian women and by white men, and also music and also sexual violence. Similar themes across both the books, but whereas Mongrel was a lot more melancholy and sad and slow, The Fetishist was kind of ridiculous to a certain extent. It was kind of pushed to a almost satirical extreme. It is about a woman who is has MS and is dying, and her thinking back to her relationship with this titular fetishist, but there is a lot of love there as well. It is not simply a fetishist narrative, although there is elements of that too, and then also from the perspective of this man as he is being kidnapped by a woman that he's not sure why he's been kidnapped by her, and also of the kidnapper who whose mother killed herself because of this fetishist man. This absurd punk band, this has these moments of extreme like ridiculousness that are quite funny and quite heightened, and then it also has sort of more intimate, slow-moving like relationship parts of this of it as well. It was published posthumously after Catherine Min died, and I think there could have been more work with the editing. I think sometimes there's a bit more, it's a bit bloated, and bits could have been cut out or drawn back a little bit. Occasionally it felt a bit repetitive, but I definitely thought it was a good fun read, and that's what I said I was looking for at the start of the year, so I can't blame it for that. I definitely thought it was the most fun out of all the books that I've read so far this year. I'm not very well, so I filmed this in 2 parts, and I'm not sure if it looks funny, but in March I read 7 books, so finally getting back on track with the reading. and one and two of them that I read are in a vlog, which is up there. The ones in the vlog are The Tower, which I've just realised I do have a physical copy of, but I don't know where that is. So, this is historical fiction set in Scotland in the 16th century. It is about Mary, Queen of Scots, after she has married her third husband and been kidnapped by a set of lords who want to force her to abdicate and are keeping her in a tower in the middle of a loch. And she is kept there with two maidservants who are actual servants and not like ladies in waiting, and also the pregnant woman, lady of the house, and the mother of the person who owns the tower, and they are confining her into this small space, and she is pregnant when she gets there as well. Mary is as well, and it is just a very like closed kind of locked door or bottle episode of a book about this one place where there is no one, and Mary wanting to like escape, but also kind of exploring what it means to be a woman in 16th century, and the kind of culture and the connections there between France and Scotland at the time, Mary having been raised in the French court. And it was pretty good. I enjoyed it. There's another queer book which I wasn't expecting, but I did enjoy. It is, yeah, a look at womanhood essentially, and being a woman in this time period, and the sort of strictures and the enclosure of that, and that being represented in them being imprisoned. And I thought it was a good read, a very short book that did drag a little bit. It was very easy to read, and when I was actually reading it, it went quite quickly, but over the course of reading it, I kind of didn't keep wanting to pick it up, and I felt like it was a little repetitive. Of course, when you are stuck in one room, there isn't that much that you can explore, but I did feel like it kept doing the same things over and over, which I didn't love. I thought the characters were very interesting, and the time period was interesting as well. It's not one I know a huge amount about in terms of Mary, Queen of Scots, so that was interesting to watch, but overall I didn't love it. I just thought it was pretty good, but like decent, and if you are into historical fiction about women, then I think you probably would enjoy it. And the other one that I read in that vlog was Martyr by Kaveh Akbar, which I definitely enjoyed a lot more. It's kind of an interesting chaos of a book, kind of a tumble of a book. It is about our main character, Cyrus, or Karush if you're pronouncing it the Persian way, who is a young Iranian boy who whose mother died when he was a baby, and so him and his father moved to America, and he grew up in the Midwest, and he is now in his 20s and in a university town, although he's graduated, I believe, and he is a writer, and he wants to be a writer. He writes poetry, and he's thinking about writing about martyrdom. He's obsessed with the idea of martyrdom and death, and your death meaning something, especially considering his mum died in a plane that was shot down by the Americans. It explores that through moments of his dreams where two martyrs from history are talking to one another, like Bobby Sands and Joan of Arc. And it also has moments that are told from the perspective of his father, being a young single father in America after his wife died, and the perspective of his mum when as she was in Iran. Also a moment where our main character Cyrus goes to New York to talk to this artist who is dying, and she is being kind of on display in a gallery as a dying person. So it is all about death and creation and art, and the meaning of art and the meaning of life, and how to die a good death, and an obsession with death and wanting to mean something. It's quite an egotistical book in that way, wanting to be important and wanting your life to matter and what it means to matter and how to make matter. Did get moments a little cheesy, and I'm not sure I 100% love the ending, but I did think it was pretty very well written. It went into a lot of like depth and nuance in its exploration of the emotions of our character. And if I had read it when I was a bit younger, I would have absolutely loved it, because when I was in that kind of lost existential dread period of my life, I think if you found it at that time when you are really considering sort of grief and meaning in that way, then it could be a really great book for that moment, and it is one that I think you could come back to and find more in. As I was in Mexico, I wanted to read some Mexican fiction, so I read Like Water for Chocolate by Laura Esquivel. This is translated from Spanish by Carol Christensen and Thomas Christensen, and it is about a woman who is from the De la Garza family, and in this family the youngest daughter must stay at home to look after their mother until the mother dies, and So at the beginning she has fallen in love with this man who wants to marry her, but she's not allowed to, and so the man marries her sister instead. And it is at the time of the Mexican Revolution in the early 20th century, and so there is a lot of like violence going on in Mexico, and it follows the family through over the course of the years and through their various relationships. There's a lot of like, it's magical realism, so there's a lot of magical sex and also magical food in this book. There are recipes at the start of every chapter, and throughout the chapter it is written as a recipe book, so you get the recipe through the narrative as well. I did enjoy it, but I didn't love it. Simplistic writing that I think is common to a lot of translated magical realism, and that sometimes works for me and sometimes doesn't. Again, a very, very easy read, but one where I think the emotional impact for me was lacking. It didn't quite do anything for me. And while I enjoyed the imagery and the strange moments, as I often do with magical realism, I think there are others with more to them. This felt a little flat, a little more bland to me, and kind of a bit pointless towards the end as well. I also read Horizontal Vertigo, A City Called Mexico by Juan Villoro, which was also translated, Alfred McAdam. It's translated from the Spanish by Alfred McAdam, and this is, it's about, as you can tell from the subtitle, is about Mexico City. It is an interesting kind of meandering geography, travelogue, personal memoir, history of Mexico City all mixed together. It is told in sort of a series of vignettes, a series of chapters that are based more on ideas than they are very easily following on from one another. There are moments that are talking about like the Mexican War of Independence and the day of Independence Day and the shout, that is the thing they do in Mexico, and then it goes back in time to talk to you about how the Mexican War of Independence affected Mexico City specifically, but then there are moments where he just talks about his childhood and his personal growing up and the relation to these like sweet vendors that sell sweets on the roadside of Mexico City. It talks about homelessness and politics, and talks about Andrés Manuel López Obrador when he was mayor of Mexico City. He's now the president. And actually, when I was in Mexico, one of my favourite things was all the wee AMLitos everywhere. Which is, so they have this little cartoon of AMLO, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, with his little buck teeth everywhere, just like grinning and doing like thumbs up. I'm not a huge memoir person, so I didn't fall in love with it, and also it felt much more like it was a personal relation to a city than a full like in-depth history or geography of the city. But I did think that it was quite amusing and quite well told, quite witty, and definitely if you are visiting Mexico City or familiar with Mexico City at all, I think it would be a fun read for you. Very, very engaging. I listened to the audiobook, which was narrated by Gabriel Parras, and I found him very engaging to listen to as well. He has a really great voice for this kind of thing. And then I had two book clubs in this month. So I read Hungry Ghosts by Kevin Jared Hussein for my in real life book club. This is set in, oh my god, why have I already forgotten where it's set? Trinidad. This is set in Trinidad in the 1940s in a Hindu community in Trinidad, and it is about a woman who is married to this much older man, and he goes somewhere at the beginning of the book and he might be coming back, but she's not sure what's going on or where he is. And her relationship with the dogs in the compound start to die one by one, and so she calls in one of the men who works there to stay with her, but she also kind of has an interest in him, kind of almost bordering on an obsession with this man. And then we also, this man and his family in the place where they live that was a former barracks, which is very run down, and the people who live in this barracks are kind of the other section of this story. So that's the very wealthy people, and then we also have the poverty of living in these barracks and being discriminated against for being Hindu rather than Christian. And there is like gendered violence, sexual violence, organised crime, and a fair amount of violence in general going on in this book. Overall, it was very easy to read, but I didn't understand really what the point was, what we were going for with this book. There are various different vignettes from various different characters make up the story, but there isn't really a through line plot. The idea of the hungry ghosts is the ghosts that have moved on, you have to feed them in order to stop them like damaging your life. And so there's definitely people who have been lost and the ways this is affecting the community and kind of the sins of history idea is a part of it. But overall I just didn't really understand what it was doing or why it was doing anything, and I found it a little boring. It dragged a little bit, and then it got very ramped up with a lot of violence towards the end, some of it that didn't seem to have much of a purpose. So it felt a little disjointed, and I didn't really think it was fine. Definitely readable, but we didn't have much to discuss in book club. Like, it didn't last us long for a discussion. The final book that I read this month, that I finished this month, was East of Eden by John Steinbeck, and I am not going to talk too much about this book at all. East of Eden is a great American novel by John Steinbeck, and it is about two families in the early 20th century in California, and it's kind of, East of Eden is where Cain is banished after he kills Abel, and so there's a lot of biblical references and the ideas of Cain and Abel, and gender, evil, the idea of good and evil, the idea of nature versus nurture, and family relationships, the idea of gender, like a lot about gender and immigration in this book as well. But I'm not going to talk to you about my feelings or thoughts or ideas, because I do have a live show coming out for East of Eden at on Sunday the 7th of April, so this Sunday coming if you're watching this as it came out, and I'm going to be discussing East of Eden with Sophie from Bibliosophie, and we are going to talk about all of our thoughts and feelings there, because East of Eden was the big book club pick for February and March this year. So if you want to hear all of my in-depth thoughts and ideas about that, and also Sophie's ideas and the things that they bring up in discussion, please do come and join us this Sunday. I do hope to see lots of you there. And do let me know if you've read any of the books that I talked about in this video. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I would love to hear from you. If you are new here, my name is Roisin. I put out new videos twice a week, so I will see you again very soon. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye!